Long after midnight, when most of Brookhaven was asleep and the rain had turned the empty streets into shimmering ribbons of reflected streetlight, a desperate knock echoed against the heavy steel door of the Black Ridge Riders Clubhouse. And inside the garage, 3 bikers who had seen more trouble than most people could imagine suddenly found themselves facing something none of them had expected: a frightened, pregnant woman asking for shelter with nothing but the words, "Please, just one night." The Black Ridge Riders garage sat at the edge of town between an abandoned tire shop and a long stretch of gravel lot, where weeds pushed through cracked asphalt, the kind of place most people avoided after dark. And that was exactly how the club preferred it. Inside, the air smelled of engine oil, hot metal, and coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long while Mac, Rico, and Tanner worked late rebuilding the carburetor on an old Harley that had seen better decades. Mac straightened first when the knock came, wiping his hands on a rag already dark with grease, his gray beard brushing the collar of his jacket as he glanced toward the door. Rico looked up from a tray of bolts and frowned. Tanner paused the music playing softly from his phone. The knock came again, softer this time but steady, not the impatient pounding of someone drunk or looking for trouble, but something hesitant, almost careful. Mac crossed the shop floor and cracked the door open a few inches, keeping one heavy boot braced against the frame in case he needed to slam it shut fast. Rain blew in through the opening, cold and sharp, and standing under the weak glow of the alley light was a young woman who looked like she had been walking for miles. Her hair clung to her face, her jacket was thin and soaked through, and one arm was wrapped tightly around the curve of her stomach. She was heavily pregnant, the kind of pregnant that meant the baby could come any week. For a moment no one spoke. The woman's eyes flicked nervously past Mac into the garage, as if she expected someone to appear behind him and drag her away. Finally, she said in a quiet voice that trembled despite her effort to stay calm, "Please, can I stay here for one night?" Mac studied her carefully. Years on the road and years in the club had taught him how to read people quickly. Some folks carried lies in their eyes, some carried anger, and some carried the hollow look of someone running from consequences. But this woman carried something else entirely: fear, the kind that came from someone who believed the danger wasn't behind them yet. "What's your name?" Mac asked, his voice low and steady. "Lena," she replied. Rico stepped closer behind Mac, arms folded across his chest as he took in the scene. "You lost?" he asked, not unkindly but cautious. Lena shook her head. "No." Her eyes dropped to the ground, then back up again with a fragile kind of determination. "I just need somewhere safe until morning." Tanner leaned against the workbench watching quietly. "You got family in town?" he asked. Lena hesitated just long enough for the answer to become obvious. "Not anymore." Rain continued to fall steadily behind her, darkening the pavement and soaking the cuffs of her jeans. Mac's gaze drifted briefly to the empty street beyond her shoulder. No headlights, no footsteps, no one chasing her. But the tension in her posture said she expected someone might appear at any second. "You alone?" Mac asked. Lena nodded slowly. "Yes." Rico exhaled through his nose. "You shouldn't be walking around like that this late," he said, gesturing toward her stomach. 8 months maybe." Lena gave a small nod. "Almost." The 3 bikers exchanged a quick glance. It wasn't a conversation spoken aloud, just the kind of silent communication that came from years of knowing how the others thought. Finally, Mac stepped back and pulled the door open wider. "Get inside before you catch pneumonia." Lena blinked as if she hadn't expected the answer to be yes. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped over the threshold slowly, almost cautiously, like someone entering unfamiliar territory where the rules were unclear. The door closed behind her with a solid metallic thud that seemed to cut the storm away from the warmth of the garage. Inside, the place felt larger than it looked from outside. High ceilings crisscrossed with metal beams, bikes in various stages of repair lined up along the walls, and tools hanging neatly on boards that covered half the shop. Lena looked around quickly, absorbing everything while still clutching her stomach protectively. Rico grabbed a clean shop towel and handed it to her. "Here," he said. "You're dripping all over the floor." She took it with a quiet, "Thank you," and dabbed rainwater from her face. Tanner disappeared into a side room and returned with a thick blanket that smelled faintly like detergent and motor oil. He draped it over her shoulders without ceremony. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a worn couch near the office door. Lena lowered herself onto it carefully, moving with the slow, deliberate caution of someone carrying more than just her own weight. Mac watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You want to tell us who you're running from?" Lena's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. The question hung in the air longer this time. When she finally answered, her voice dropped almost to a whisper. "My husband." Rico muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like a curse. Mac crouched slightly, so he was at eye level with her. "He hurt you." Lena didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked down at her stomach and rested both hands there as if shielding the life inside. That gesture told them everything they needed to know. Tanner leaned back against the workbench and rubbed the back of his neck. "Does he know where you are?" Lena shook her head quickly. "No. I left while he was asleep." Max studied her face again, noticing the faint shadow of a bruise along her jawline that the dim lighting almost hid. Something hardened slightly in his expression. "All right," he said finally. "You can stay here tonight." Lena looked up at him, surprise and relief colliding in her eyes. "Really?" Mac nodded once. "Yeah, one night." Rico was already dragging a folding cot out of the storage room while Tanner grabbed a pillow and another blanket from a supply shelf. Within minutes, they had set up a small bed in the office where the air was warmer and quieter. Lena watched the rough men move around the garage, making space for her like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. When everything was ready, Mac gestured toward the office. "Get some rest," he said. "You look like you need it." Lena stood slowly, one hand still supporting her stomach as she walked toward the cot. At the doorway, she paused and turned back toward them. Her voice was soft but sincere. "Thank you," she said. None of the bikers made a big deal out of it. Rico just shrugged. Tanner returned to the Harley. Mac picked up his rag again. But as the rain continued falling outside and the clubhouse lights burned quietly through the night, every one of them knew the same thing the moment Lena had stepped through the door. This wasn't going to be just one night. A frightened pregnant woman had knocked on the door of the Black Ridge Riders clubhouse in the middle of a storm asking for just one night of safety. But by the time morning arrived, the bikers inside would realize that the quiet request for shelter was only the beginning of a much deeper problem, because the man she had run from was not the kind who simply let people walk away. Lena slept longer than she expected in the small office where the club had set up a folding cot for her, the thick blanket pulled around her shoulders, and one hand resting protectively over her stomach even in sleep. While outside in the garage, the low hum of early morning life slowly replaced the quiet of the night. Mac was already awake, leaning over the workbench with a mug of black coffee. Rico stood near the open bay door, letting fresh air push the lingering smell of oil and gasoline out into the cool morning. And Tanner was heating a few breakfast burritos on the same hot plate they usually used for coffee. None of them said it out loud, but each of them had checked the office door more than once during the night, just to make sure the woman they had let inside was still resting safely. When Lena finally stirred, sunlight was cutting through the high windows of the garage and painting long, dusty beams across the concrete floor. For a moment, she looked confused, sitting up slowly on the cot and brushing damp hair away from her face while her mind caught up with where she was. The small office around her was simple but tidy, an old wooden desk pushed against the wall, a filing cabinet with faded labels, motorcycle posters that had been hanging there so long the corners had curled slightly. Then the memory returned. The rain, the knock on the door, the three bikers who had opened it without asking too many questions. She stood carefully, one hand instinctively supporting her stomach, and stepped into the garage where the men were already moving around as if it were any ordinary morning. Rico noticed her first and held up a mug. "Morning," he said casually. "Tea." Figured coffee might not be the best idea. Lena accepted the cup with both hands, the warmth spreading through her fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mac glanced over from the workbench and gave a small nod of greeting, while Tanner slid a chair out from the table near the tool wall. "Sit," he said. "You look like you didn't sleep in a real bed for a while." Lena lowered herself slowly into the chair, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and took a cautious sip of the tea. The simple kindness of it seemed to surprise her more than anything else. Tanner placed half a breakfast burrito on a plate in front of her. "Eat," he said with a small shrug. "Doc's orders for moms-to-be." For a few minutes they let her eat in peace while the garage filled with the quiet sounds of morning. tools shifting on metal surfaces, the distant rumble of traffic somewhere down the highway, the creak of the large garage door swaying slightly in the breeze. Mac finally leaned back against the tool chest and folded his arms, watching her with the steady patience of someone who had spent years learning when to push for answers and when to wait. "You feeling a little better?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Yes." Her voice sounded stronger now that she had rested. "Thank you for letting me stay." Rico waved the gratitude away with a quick flick of his hand. "He said you needed one night. That's not exactly a big favor." But Mac's eyes stayed focused on her. "You ready to tell us what happened?" he asked calmly. Lena stared down into her tea for a moment, turning the mug slowly between her hands as if gathering the courage to start speaking. It was obvious she had spent the entire night thinking about this moment. Finally, she looked up. "My husband's name is Travis," she said quietly. Tanner leaned against the workbench, listening closely. "The guy you ran from last night," he said. Lena nodded. "He wasn't always like that," she continued, almost as if she felt the need to explain. "When we first got married, things were good. He worked construction, and we had a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but we were happy." Her voice softened slightly as she spoke about the past. "Then his company shut down last winter, and everything changed." Rico crossed his arms and waited for the rest. "At first he just got quiet," Lena said. "Then he started drinking." Mac's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly in understanding. "After a few months he was angry all the time," she continued. "Bills, neighbors, the baby coming." Her hands moved protectively over her stomach again without her noticing. "He said the baby ruined his life." Tanner muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Lena took another breath before continuing. "Last night, he threw a chair across the kitchen." Her voice dropped slightly. "It hit the wall right next to me." The garage fell completely silent for a moment. Mac noticed the faint bruise along her jaw that the daylight now revealed more clearly than the dim garage lights had the night before. "Did he hit you?" Mac asked gently. Lena hesitated before answering. "Not last night." That was enough for the men to understand the rest. Rico rubbed the back of his neck slowly. "You got anywhere else you can go?" Lena shook her head. "No family nearby. My parents moved away years ago." Tanner asked, "Friends?" She gave a small sad smile. "Not ones I could show up at like this." Mac looked toward the open garage door where the empty road stretched away between quiet buildings. For a moment he seemed lost in thought before turning back to her again. "You planning to go back there?" he asked. Lena's answer came immediately. "No," it was the firmest word she had spoken since walking into the garage. "I won't raise my baby in that house." Mac gave a small approving nod. Rico leaned forward slightly. "If this guy wakes up and realizes you're gone, he might start looking." Lena's shoulders tightened. "He doesn't know where I came." Tanner tilted his head thoughtfully. "Maybe not yet." Mac pushed away from the tool chest and crossed his arms. "Either way, you're not wandering around town today," he said simply. Lena blinked in surprise. "But I said I only needed one night." Rico gave a small grin. "Yeah, about that." Tanner nodded toward her stomach. 8 months pregnant isn't exactly great timing for long walks. Lena looked between the three men, clearly overwhelmed by the idea that their help might extend beyond the stormy night she had stumbled into. "I don't want to cause trouble for you," she said quietly. Max shrugged like the idea didn't bother him at all. "Trouble usually finds us whether we invite it or not." Just then the rumble of another motorcycle echoed outside as one of the club's morning riders pulled into the gravel lot, the sound rolling through the garage like distant thunder, and Lena realized that the rough-looking bikers who had opened their door to a stranger the night before were slowly becoming something she had not expected to find anywhere again. People who might actually stand between her and the life she had just escaped. The woman who had arrived soaked in rain asking for only one night of shelter was still sitting in the Black Ridge Riders' garage the next afternoon, surrounded by people who had quietly decided she wasn't leaving until she was safe, and none of them realized just how quickly things would change once the man she had run from started searching for her. The garage had slowly filled throughout the morning as more members of the club arrived for their usual work and repairs, engines rumbling into the gravel lot one after another, while Lena sat near the workbench sipping tea and trying to adjust to the strange new reality she had stepped into. At first she had expected questions or suspicion from the newcomers, but Mac handled the introductions simply. "This is Lena," he said to each rider who walked in. She's staying with us for a bit. That was all the explanation anyone seemed to need. Diesel, one of the club's senior riders with a shaved head and calm eyes, gave Lena a warm smile before disappearing into the back office and returning a few minutes later with a thicker blanket and a small pillow. Pregnant backs don't like those metal chairs, she said matter-of-factly as she swapped Lena's seat for a padded stool. Another rider named Wrench brought a small space heater and set it near the office doorway. The garage began to feel less like a workshop and more like a strange, rough-edged refuge. Lena watched all of this with quiet disbelief, still unsure how she had gone from walking alone through a storm the night before to sitting in the middle of a motorcycle club that seemed determined to protect her. Around midday, Max stepped outside to make a phone call, pacing slowly across the gravel while the rest of the riders continued working on bikes or cleaning tools. When he came back inside, his expression was thoughtful but calm. "Got someone coming by later," he told Rico and Tanner quietly. Lena overheard him and looked up nervously. "Who?" she asked. Mac pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. "A lawyer friend of mine," he said. "Name's Karen. She deals with situations like yours." Lena looked startled. "You didn't have to do that." Mac shrugged. "Figured it wouldn't hurt to know your options." The afternoon moved slowly after that. Diesel helped Lena find a quiet corner of the office where she could lie down for a while. And Gloria, an older woman who helped run errands for the club, arrived with a bag full of groceries and a stack of baby blankets she had apparently dug out of storage the moment she heard there was a pregnant guest staying at the clubhouse. Lena nearly cried when Gloria handed them to her. "Every baby deserves something soft to come home to," Gloria said gently. By the time Karen arrived, the sun was already starting to sink behind the warehouses at the edge of town. She stepped out of a dark sedan wearing a tailored jacket and carrying a leather briefcase, looking completely out of place among the motorcycles and grease-stained concrete. But she walked into the garage with confident ease, like she had visited plenty of places like this before. Mac greeted her with a quick handshake before introducing her to Lena. "You're the one who walked through a storm last night," Karen said kindly as she sat down across from Lena at the small desk in the office. "That already tells me you're tougher than you think." Lena gave a small, nervous laugh and began explaining everything. The job Travis had lost, the drinking, the arguments that slowly turned into something darker, the chair thrown across the kitchen the night before. Karen listened carefully without interrupting, writing occasional notes on a legal pad, while the low rumble of motorcycles and tools echoed softly through the garage outside. When Lena finished speaking, Karen closed the notebook and looked at her directly. "Here's what we can do," she said. "First, we file for a protective order so your husband legally can't come near you. Second, we start the process of documenting everything he's done." Lena swallowed nervously. "Will that really stop him?" Karen answered honestly. "It gives you protection, and it gives the police something to act on if he crosses the line." Lena nodded slowly, still processing everything. "Where would I go?" she asked quietly. Karen glanced toward the garage where the Black Ridge riders were gathered around a workbench arguing about the best way to rebuild an engine. "That depends," she said. "Do you feel safe here?" Lena looked through the office window at the group of bikers who had welcomed her without hesitation. Mac noticed her watching and gave a small, reassuring nod. For the first time since leaving her house, Lena felt something that had been missing for months. "Yes," she said softly. Karen smiled. "Then that's where you stay until we sort the rest out." The decision seemed to settle over the room like something final. That evening, the club gathered outside near the garage while Wrench fired up a grill he had dragged from storage, and someone passed around sodas and paper plates while the sun dipped low behind the row of buildings. Lena sat on a folding chair watching them laugh and argue about motorcycles like an ordinary group of friends. Diesel sat beside her and handed her another blanket when the air turned cooler. "You did the hard part already," Diesel said quietly. Walking away, Lena looked down at her stomach and felt the baby kick gently for the first time that day. It made her smile. Later that night, long after the garage lights flickered on and the street outside fell quiet again, Lena rested on the small couch in the office while Mac locked the main door and checked the security cameras they had installed near the lot entrance. Rico lowered the roll-up door halfway, and Tanner set the alarm system before switching off the overhead lights. The clubhouse settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. Before heading out, Mac stopped at the office doorway. "You good?" he asked. Lena nodded, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Yeah," she said. I think I am. Mac gave a satisfied nod. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out the rest. When the door closed behind him, Lena lay back against the pillow and listened to the distant sound of motorcycles passing on the highway. For the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid of the next morning. The Black Ridge Riders had only meant to give a stranger one safe night when she knocked on their door in the rain. But somewhere between that midnight moment and the quiet evening that followed, something bigger had taken shape. Because sometimes the people who become family aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones who open the door when you have nowhere else left to go.